Here it is. I finally watched Barbie the other night. My final thoughts were, well, that was an okay movie. It was a little bit long though. It seems like over the past 10 years or so, that is the most common response I have whenever I watch a new movie. It was fine, but it was a little bit long. And I've kind of slowly noticed this happening over time, that movies are just getting longer and longer and longer. It's just gotten to the point where it's too much now. Movies are too long. I don't want to sit there for 3 hours and watch your stupid movie. Get in there, tell me the story, make your point, and let me move on with my life. You know? I looked up a chart fairly recently talking about the length of Marvel movies, and sure enough, for the past 15 years, most of the Marvel movies that are coming out, each one gets a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. Now, I don't really care that that's happening with Marvel movies. I don't really like Marvel. Personally, I kind of think it's stupid. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is just, I don't know, dude. It's too much. Back to the original point, movies are just getting too damn long. Most movies nowadays, I'm like halfway through, I'm like, okay, I'm like starting to get antsy. I've been sitting here for an hour and a half and the movie's only halfway over. I'm getting antsy. I need to get up. I need to move around. I need to like go grab a fresh snack or something. I don't know. I think it was Stephen King who said this. When you finish writing a story, cut out about 40% of it. You don't want to go too long about these characters. You don't want to talk about this stuff. You don't want to lose the interest of the people. And that's the issue with these movies. It's like I'm watching a movie that you're trying to get me invested enough in these characters to watch a 3-hour movie. So then they end up having like a more extended intro to explain more of the backstory, which just makes the movie longer. And half the time it's not even like that interesting or like that relevant to the actual story that they're telling. And so it's like you're making the movie longer in an attempt to make me care about these characters, but this is so boring that it doesn't actually make me care about the characters anymore. In fact, if anything, it makes me care about the characters less. That by the time you actually get to the story that you want to tell, I'm already not interested in these characters. And then you go on and you tell the story that's way too long. So, back to the example with the Barbie movie. The whole Mattel executives, those guys could have been completely cut out of the movie and it would have saved you like 10 or 15 minutes on the movie. Any of the scenes that those guys are in are unnecessary and usually purely there for comic relief. And you have a lot of other outlets that you're already like using for comic relief. So like you don't really need these guys to just like step in like as stooges and just do stupid silly things. You've got a whole army of Kens to do that, honestly. It's really easy for me to like conceive a version of Barbie where the executives just aren't present in the movie at all. The only like somewhat important role that they played was getting Barbie to Mattel so that way she could talk to Ruth. And honestly, I feel like you could have just had Ruth show up in the end of the movie like she did, not having introduced her earlier and just have her explain, who she is and have her still have that conversation with Barbie and have it be just as meaningful. And there's ways that they could have written things to introduce Barbie to America Ferrera's character, which I don't know why I can't remember her name. Gloria. Gloria. Anyway, but they could have done a million other things to get Gloria and Barbie introduced to each other instead of just like having her coincidentally show up in front of the Mattel headquarters at the perfect time to help Barbie escape. Like they could have been introduced in the school in like a more meaningful way. It feels like a lot of movies, they write out the script and then they don't change it at all. So now you have this script that's way too long. And you should, when you're filming, when you're editing, at really any stage in the production cycle of a movie, you should be able to say, hey, we're just going to cut this scene. It doesn't make sense. We're going to cut this character completely because it doesn't really like fit the flow with the movie. And now we just kind of have this character in here who doesn't do anything, like Will Ferrell's character in the Barbie movie, and it's just, it feels really dumb to me, because instead of just being like, hey, we can cut this character and make this movie better, they're like, we don't want to cut anything, we're just going to make this movie way too long and way too boring. And it's like, most of the movies that are coming out these days, I'm like, it could be half the length and be a more impactful movie, because there's not as much just like random filler crap in the middle of it. We don't need this whole big long backstory to get us invested in this character. You can introduce the character, tell us why they're important, tell us who they are, and then immediately jump into the story. Something that Kurt Vonnegut said in, I forget if it was like a lecture or an essay or something that he wrote, um, on the topic of writing short stories. He said, start as close to the end as you possibly can. Because a lot of writers, and I think that this includes script writers for movies, are way more invested in their characters than any of the audience, because this is a character that's been in my head for months. It's a character that I'm thinking about all the time, and I'm invested in them, so I want to go back and tell their origin story and why that's important. And then, oh, I'm going to go back even farther to explain like why this thing that happened in this section of the story is relevant to them. And it's like, no, you don't have to tell a whole nother story to like tell me why the character is on this journey or why the character is important. Introduce the character, tell me who they are, tell me why they're important. I feel like even in the Barbie movie, the whole setup could have been so much shorter. Everything before Gloria and Barbie meeting could have been like cut down to like 10 minutes. You know, and instead of having like this big revelation of Barbie going like, "Oh, I'm here for the mom, not for the daughter," and that's just a plot twist that's meaningless. It doesn't have any kind of impact on the story. It doesn't have any kind of like symbolic meaning or anything like that. It's just kind of like this meaningless plot twist. And I feel like you could have just done that like establishing song in Barbie Land, quickly kind of had Barbie do that whole thing where she's like having all of these like existential thoughts, and quickly move to the part where she's leaving Barbie Land, and then cut to Gloria. And you could immediately, the audience would then immediately understand the connection. If they cut to Gloria playing with the Barbie, they immediately understand that connection. They immediately see why these characters are intertwined in the way that they are and why it's important for them to meet. Then they could have easily set up a meeting at the school. And that's like that whole like first half of the Barbie movie. Like I said, really everything before Gloria and Barbie meets, you could have done in 10 or 15 minutes. And it would have felt a lot more meaningful, because there would have been a lot less, like I said earlier, there would have been a lot less of just this like filler of, hey, let's just like make jokes and here's Ken. And I don't know, the whole, like in the beginning of the movie, the whole like rivalry between Beach Ken and one of the other Kens, like that whole rivalry felt not that important, honestly. I think that that was just an attempt of them like establishing that rivalry so that way the Barbies come back later, or so that way when the Barbies are like making the Kens fight each other, it's like, oh, these guys are already rivals. But again, you didn't necessarily like have to do this like whole long thing, and like the sub story where like Ken is in love with Barbie, but like Barbie like basically just sees him as a friend. It's like, I don't know, that all felt kind of unnecessary as well. It's like there's no, that doesn't have like a bigger impact on the story. Overall, like I said, the movie was fine, but it just feels like they were trying to go in too many different directions with like all of these different sub stories. And it's like, no, just get in and tell the story that you want to tell, and stay centered on that main story. And all of the side stuff that you add, make sure that that is like relevant and immediately connects in to like the main story that you're trying to tell. It doesn't have to be this like, oh, well, like here's this thing that's like tangentially relevant, so now we like need to go tell this whole side story of how this relates. Anyway, the overall point that I'm getting at is movies are way too long. And I think that at every stage in a movie's production, you shouldn't be afraid to make cuts. Cut out whole entire characters, cut out scenes, cut out whole like unnecessary like subplots. Because like I said, using the Barbie movie as an example, there was a lot that felt really unnecessary, that didn't relate back to the main story, that wasn't relevant to like character growth and character development and like the story that they were trying to tell as a whole. Get in and tell us that story and don't get sidetracked, because the more you get sidetracked and the more you look at all these other subplots and side stories, the less impactful the movie as a whole feels. Maybe these movie studios are just making movies longer so that way people feel like they're getting more bang for their buck. But honestly, I would feel like I'm getting more bang for my buck if I see a movie that's more meaningful and has less of this like random garbage in there. Last point I want to make, the way the movie ends, where they're like psyching up Barbie and like, oh, you're going to be okay and great. And they're making it sound like it's going to be like this job interview with like Mattel or something, or it's going to be like this really big, like empowering thing. And then in the end, it's just like, okay, your gynecologist will see you now, or whatever the line is. And the big reveal is like, oh, she's actually just going to the gynecologist. Because one throwaway joke from earlier in the movie is that Barbies and Kens don't have any genitals, but now she's a real human and so she has genitals. And what could have been this like really empowering, inspiring ending scene where it's like, hey, she's a real human now and she's fitting into the world and, like getting this job and like doing these things to like raise herself and other women up. It could have just been like, oh, she's a human now, so now she has a vagina. And it's like, I don't know, you turned what could have been like a really cool moment into like a stupid crass joke in a way that like honestly felt offensive, because like, I don't know, you've said multiple times in the movie that like the whole plot of this is like female empowerment, and then you end the movie with basically saying, oh, she's a real human now, and uh and the way that we can tell is because vagina. Then it's like, I feel like that undermines the entire point of the whole movie. I think that was a really, not just like a not funny ending, but that I think was an actual like bad ending that undermined the entire message of the movie. I feel like it was kind of objectifying and crass and stupid, and I don't know. Like I said, the movie as a whole was okay, but it could have been a lot better and it could have been a lot more meaningful in a lot of ways. And it's just kind of sad to me when there's like something that can be like this great, amazing, powerful, moving, impactful thing, and most of the movie just gets cut down into like, here's a joke about genitals. And not even like that ending scene in particular, but I feel like there were like a lot of like serious, impactful scenes, and then they just kind of like broke it up with kind of like dumb humor and stuff, which I think that there is a place for dumb humor, especially when you're talking about heavy subjects. It helps to keep the overall tone light, but I think that there's ways to do that help to lighten the mood, and then there's ways to do that kind of distract from your overall point. And I feel like they were kind of doing the latter in a lot of the movie, and I feel like that just kind of hurt the movie as a whole. Okay, so I'm almost done editing this at this point, and I do just want to add in real quick that the Barbie movie is less than 2 hours long, so it's not particularly long by like modern movie standards. The overall point that I was making with using Barbie as an example, that there's just kind of a lot of dead space in movies, in scenes and characters and subplots that they could have cut out. The reason that I'm using Barbie movie as an example is partially because it's the movie that I've seen most recently, but also just, I feel like Barbie could have been an hour and a half movie and it would have been more impactful for it, because you wouldn't have had to rely on filling up that runtime with these like dumb jokes and like meaningless characters and subplots that aren't really like relevant to the overall message of the movie. So I acknowledge Barbie is not a particularly long movie. There just is a lot of dead stuff that could have been cut from that movie. So that's all. I think that's everything I wanted to say about Barbie. Originally, this was just going to be a video on about how it's stupid how long movies are, and I guess it kind of got more into analyzing why movies are that long, and I don't know, whatever. I make new videos every Monday and Thursday. So like and subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notifications when a new video goes live. Do the stuff, comment, blah blah blah. You know the things to do. If you want to support the channel, you do the things. Whatever. Bye.